What would you do if you walked into the most prestigious bridal boutique in the city, the kind of place where wedding gowns cost more than most people's cars, and the manager looked you up and down, curled her lip, and decided you weren't worth her time? What would you do if that same manager, egged on by your fiancé's vindictive ex-girlfriend, grabbed the sample gown you were trying on and tore it, physically tore it, before having two security guards drag you out onto the cold sidewalk and your bare feet? What would you do if you were left standing there, shaking with humiliation, while people on the street stared and the ex-girlfriend laughed from the warm, golden interior of the shop? Here's what I did. I called my fiancé. And what those women didn't know, what they couldn't have possibly imagined, was that the man they thought was a mild-mannered IT consultant named Marcus Chen was actually Crown Prince Marcus Aurelius Chen Waverly of the Sovereign Principality of Chiron, heir to one of the oldest royal dynasties in Southeast Asia, a man whose family controlled a sovereign wealth fund valued at over $230 billion. They had no idea that when I made that call, 10 armored SUVs were already moving through the streets of Manhattan, converging on their little boutique like a black tide. They had absolutely no idea what was coming. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, because the beginning is important. The beginning is where everything makes sense. My name is Clara Webb. At least that's the name I used when I came to New York 18 months ago. My actual name is Dr. Clara Marguerite Webb Ashton, and the Webb Ashton family is one of those quietly extraordinary American dynasties that you've never heard of because we've spent generations making sure of it. My great-grandfather built a pharmaceutical empire in the early 20th century. My grandfather expanded it into biotech. My mother diversified into technology and real estate. By the time I was born, the family wealth had compounded into something that most people would call obscene. I just called it lonely. I grew up in a world where everyone knew exactly who I was and what I represented. Private schools, where the other students were calculating social alliances before they were old enough to drive. Charity galas, where people smiled at me while mentally calculating what access to my family might be worth. Romantic interests who pursued me with the kind of dedication that had nothing to do with who I actually was and everything to do with what they stood to gain. By my mid-20s, I developed a finely tuned sensor for inauthenticity. I could spot a social climber across a crowded room. I could identify a calculated compliment within 3 words of it being delivered, and I was exhausted. So when I turned 27 and my mother began gently suggesting suitable matches from other wealthy families, I did something that sent my publicist into emergency protocol. I disappeared, not literally, not permanently, but I stepped out of my life with careful precision. I created a modest identity, Clara Webb, a pediatric nurse working at a public hospital in Manhattan. I rented a small apartment in Astoria, Queens. I bought clothes from Target and J.Crew. I rode the subway. I ate at neighborhood diners and ordered coffee from the cart on the corner instead of the private chef who'd been part of my life since childhood. The agreement with my mother was simple: 1 year. I would live this experiment for 1 year, and whatever I found, whatever I experienced, I would report back. She thought I'd be begging to come home within 6 weeks. That was 18 months ago. And the reason I'm still here, the reason I extended the experiment 6 months past its original deadline, was Marcus. Marcus Chen came into my life on a Tuesday evening in February, at the kind of moment that feels almost too perfect to be real. I'd been working a long shift at the hospital, 12 hours on the pediatric ward, and I was exhausted in the good way, the way that only comes from meaningful work. I was sitting in a diner on 34th Street, still in my scrubs, eating a late dinner alone, when a man sat down at the counter 2 seats away and asked the waitress if the chili was actually any good. Honestly, the waitress had said, "Get the soup. The chili tastes like the cook is angry." He'd laughed, a genuine, surprised laugh, and ordered the soup. And then, because the diner was almost empty and I'd smiled at the exchange. He'd looked at me and said, "Long day?" "Is it the scrubs or the expression?" I'd asked. "Both," he said, "but the expression mostly. You look like someone who's been carrying something heavy for a very long time." I'd stared at him for a moment. It was such an unusually perceptive thing for a stranger to say. He had dark hair, warm brown eyes, and the kind of face that was handsome without being aware of it. He was wearing jeans and a plain gray sweater, the kind that pilled slightly at the cuffs from being washed too many times. He looked like exactly what he claimed to be. Marcus Chen, IT consultant, working a contract gig for a tech startup in Midtown. We talked for 2 hours that night. He asked about nursing, about what drew me to pediatrics specifically, about what it felt like to work with sick children and their frightened families. He listened to the answers the way that people rarely do, actually listened, asking follow-up questions, remembering details from earlier in the conversation and circling back to them. He didn't perform interest. He was interested. When I asked about his work, he was modest, almost to a fault. He fixed systems when they broke, he said. He debugged code. He liked the puzzle-solving nature of it. He traveled sometimes for work, spent time in different countries troubleshooting for international clients, which was why his accent was this fascinating blend of British cadence and American rhythm that I couldn't quite place. I didn't know it then, but the international clients were heads of state. The troubleshooting was diplomatic negotiation, and the travel was on a private jet with full security detail. We exchanged numbers at the end of the night, and he texted me the next morning. "The soup was exceptional. Thank you for not letting me order the chili." We had our second date that weekend, a walk through Central Park, then lunch at a tiny Vietnamese place in Chelsea that he claimed was the best pho in the city, and was absolutely right. He held my hand on the walk back. His hand was warm and steady. Our relationship grew slowly, and then all at once, the way the best ones do. By spring, we were spending every weekend together. By summer, we'd established rituals: Sunday morning farmers markets in Brooklyn, Thursday evening cooking experiments in his apartment where we'd pick a new cuisine each week and attempt to replicate it from scratch. He was terrible at Thai food and brilliant at Italian. I was competent at French and catastrophic at Indian. We ate everything anyway, even the failures. He met Maya, my closest friend from the hospital, in April, and she reported back to me afterward. "He looks at you like you're the most interesting person in the room, even when there are more interesting people in the room. That's rare. Hold on to him." He proposed to me in October, on the roof of his apartment building, with fairy lights he'd strung himself and takeout from the Vietnamese place where we'd had our first proper date. The ring was a round, brilliant diamond, simple and beautiful, set in rose gold. He'd picked it without help from anyone, had asked me 3 weeks earlier in what he thought was a casual conversation about what I liked in jewelry, and had gone to 3 different jewelers before finding exactly the right stone. I said yes before he finished the question, and then came Vivienne. Vivienne Park entered our lives exactly 6 weeks after the engagement, arriving at a dinner party hosted by one of Marcus's work colleagues. She was 29 years old, Korean-American, with the kind of bone structure that belonged in magazines, and the kind of wealth that she wore like a second skin. She dated Marcus for 2 years before I came along, and from the moment she saw the ring on my finger, something in her eyes turned sharp and cold. "So you're the nurse," she said, when Marcus introduced us. She said nurse the way some people say it when they mean something else, something lesser. "Clara," I said, "and yes, I work in pediatrics." "How noble," Vivienne said, without a trace of sincerity. Marcus always did admire people who sacrifice themselves for others. I think it's guilt, personally. People with comfortable lives feeling better about themselves by helping people who are struggling. But you wouldn't understand that, would you? Being one of the struggling ones. I looked at her steadily. "No," I said. "I do it because I love the work." She smiled. It was a beautiful, terrible smile. "Of course you do." That was the first encounter. I classified it as ugly, but survivable. Marcus had been across the room when it happened, and hadn't heard it. And when I told him later, he apologized for her, explaining that Vivian had taken their breakup badly and hadn't quite accepted that it was permanent. But Vivian had no intention of accepting anything. 3 weeks after the dinner party, Marcus and I went to a gallery opening for a photographer friend of his. The event was held in a polished white space in Chelsea, the kind of place where the wine costs $40 a glass and the conversations are louder than they need to be. I'd worn a simple black dress and my engagement ring. Vivian appeared 20 minutes after we arrived, in a red Valentino gown that probably cost $6,000. And she wasn't alone. She'd brought 3 friends who operated as a unit, moving through social spaces with the coordinated precision of people who'd grown up understanding exactly how cruelty worked when organized properly. They found me when Marcus was across the room discussing a photograph with the artist. Vivian positioned herself in front of me with a champagne glass and that same razor smile. "Clara, darling," she said, "I'm so glad you could come. I didn't think this would be your scene." "Why not?" I asked pleasantly. "Oh, no reason. Contemporary art can be so demanding intellectually. You have to have a certain context to appreciate it, background and education and that sort of thing." She tilted her head. "Do you visit galleries often?" "Often enough," I said. One of her friends, a blonde woman in Chanel, stepped closer and examined my engagement ring with ostentatious attention. "Oh, how sweet," she said. "Is that a solitaire?" "Very classic. Very straightforward." "I love it," I said. "Of course you do," Vivian said smoothly. "It suits you perfectly. There's something very honest about simple jewelry. It tells the truth about where you come from." And then she laughed, and her friends laughed, and I stood there with my champagne and my simple ring and my simple dress, and understood that this was a campaign, not an encounter. Vivian Park had decided that I was a problem she needed to solve, and she was going to solve me with 1,000 small cuts until I bled out and walked away from Marcus on my own. I didn't walk away, but the cuts kept coming. The second significant incident happened at a Sunday brunch that Marcus's colleague organized, a group of about 12 people at a restaurant in Tribeca. Vivian was there again because she moved in the same professional circles as Marcus's IT consulting cover identity, and she arrived with information she deployed like a surgical strike. She'd found out that I worked at a public hospital. This should have been a neutral fact. It wasn't. "I was talking to someone at the hospital board," Vivian announced to the table, during a lull in conversation that she clearly created deliberately. "And they mentioned that the nursing staff at Clara's ward has been under some pressure lately. Budget cuts, staff reductions, the things that happen at underfunded public institutions." She looked at me with synthetic sympathy. "It must be so hard, Clara, working in those conditions. The stress alone must be enormous. I don't know how you manage." "We manage because the work matters," I said. "Of course," Vivian said. "And it's so wonderful that people like you exist to do the difficult work that people like us aren't equipped to do." She smiled. "It must be a relief, actually, that you're marrying Marcus. The financial security must take such a weight off your shoulders." The table went quiet. Several people looked at their plates. "I'm marrying Marcus because I love him," I said, keeping my voice even. "Financial security doesn't enter into it." "Oh, naturally," Vivian said. "I didn't mean to imply otherwise. I just know how difficult it can be, financially, for people in the medical field. The loans alone are extraordinary. Marcus mentioned once that you have significant student debt. It's nothing to be ashamed of. Most people in your position do." I looked at her for a long moment. Marcus hadn't told her anything about my finances. She was fishing, using fabricated information to see what I'd confirm. It was a sophisticated play, and I gave her nothing. "We should order," I said, picking up my menu. She smiled into her mimosa. She thought she'd scored a point. She had no idea that my family's accounting team managed a portfolio that made Marcus's visible wealth look like pocket change. The third incident was the one that pushed me toward the bridal boutique in the first place. Marcus and I had gone together to look at engagement venues, a castle-like estate venue in Connecticut that did weddings for the kind of money that would have made my nurse's salary seem like a rounding error. We'd been walking the grounds, talking about table arrangements and seasonal flowers, when Vivian appeared. She'd been there for a separately scheduled wedding consultation for a charity gala the venue was hosting, and I didn't believe for 1 second that the timing was coincidental. She was wearing tailored white trousers and a silk blouse in pale gold, dressed to suggest she belonged in this setting. She fell into step beside us with the ease of someone who'd practiced seeming welcome. "What a coincidence," she said. "Marcus, this venue is extraordinary, isn't it? I remember when we talked about getting married here." She said it lightly, casually, but she was watching my face as she said it. I kept my expression neutral. "We were never engaged, Vivian," Marcus said, his voice cooling. "No," she agreed, "but we talked about it, the way couples do when they're serious." She turned to me. "Has Marcus told you about our trip to this venue? Years ago, before you two met. We looked at the ballroom together. I always thought—" She stopped herself. "But never mind. That's ancient history. You two are planning something wonderful, I'm sure, even if the scale is a bit more modest than what Marcus usually—" Another deliberate pause. "Well, it doesn't matter. Congratulations again, Clara. I mean that sincerely." She walked away with her $1,000 shoes and her perfectly executed cruelty, and Marcus squeezed my hand and said, "She's lying. We were never here together. I've never been to this venue before today." I believed him. But the damage was done. Not to my trust in Marcus, but to my patience. I was tired of Vivian Park treating my relationship like a game she was playing, tired of her careful little attacks, tired of smiling through the cuts, which is why, 2 weeks later, I decided to go dress shopping alone. Marcus had offered to come, had offered to call ahead to a boutique, to arrange a private appointment with proper service and a dedicated consultant. He was careful like that, always trying to protect me from exactly the kind of experience I was about to have. But I'd said no. I wanted to do this on my own. I wanted to walk into a bridal boutique as Clara Webb, nurse, and choose a dress for the woman I was when Marcus fell in love with me. Not for the heiress, not for the Webb Ashton name, for Clara, just Clara. So on a Wednesday morning in late November, I put on my favorite jeans, my clean white sneakers, a cashmere sweater in soft cream, and my engagement ring, and I walked into Elise Beaumont Bridal on 5th Avenue. Elise Beaumont was, by every metric, the most prestigious bridal boutique in New York City. The gowns started at $12,000 and went up from there. The interior was all white marble and pale gold fixtures, with individual fitting rooms the size of small apartments, and a champagne service that was offered automatically upon arrival. A single gown from Elise Beaumont was a statement. Being a client of Elise Beaumont meant something in certain circles. I knew all of this. I'd done research. I also knew that the boutique's ethos, as advertised on its website, was built around the phrase, "Every bride deserves to feel extraordinary." I had the phrase in my head as I pushed open the heavy glass door and stepped into the cool, perfumed interior. The smell hit first. White flowers, something expensive and synthetic underneath. The faint, cool note of air conditioning set slightly too cold. The carpet was ivory, plush enough to muffle every sound. Display gowns stood on forms along both sides of the room, each lit by its own warm spotlight, each tagged with a small card that listed the designer and the starting price. A consultant looked up from behind a sleek reception desk. She was in her 30s, impeccably dressed in black, with the kind of smooth, professional smile that could mean anything. Then her eyes moved down from my face to my clothes and back up again. And the smile changed. It didn't disappear. It became the other kind, the kind that was polite on the surface and dismissive underneath. "Good morning," she said. "Do you have an appointment?" "I don't," I said. "I was hoping to make one, or to browse, if you have availability this morning." "We typically require appointments," she said. "Our consultants are very fully booked, and our gowns are couture-level pieces, many made to order with significant lead times. We find that clients who come prepared with a clear vision and an established budget tend to have the most productive experiences here." She was telling me I didn't belong here. She was doing it in the politest possible way. I understood every syllable of what she was actually saying. "I understand," I said. "I'm getting married in the spring, and I've been looking for the right dress. I'm happy to browse while I wait for availability. if that's possible. She looked at me for a moment longer than was comfortable. Then she said, I can check if Madame Beaumont's assistant has any gaps this morning. Please wait here. She walked away, and I stood in the middle of that pristine showroom in my jeans and my sneakers, aware that I was being assessed and found wanting by every reflective surface in the room. That was when the door opened behind me, and I heard a voice I recognized. Darling, I told you this place is absolute perfection. The Lethbridge gown in the second room is worth the trip alone. I turned slowly, and there was Vivian Park, walking into Elise Beaumont Bridal with the ease of someone who owned the place, wearing a camel coat and carrying a Chanel bag. Behind her, the boutique manager appeared from a back room, transformed from the cool professional who'd been making me wait into something warm and deferential, almost fawning, moving toward Vivian with her hands outstretched. Miss Park, the manager said, and I could hear the shift in her voice, the register of someone greeting a valued client, a real client. We weren't expecting you this morning. What a lovely surprise. Vivian's eyes found me. They moved across my jeans, my sneakers, my cream sweater. Then they landed on my ring, and she smiled the smile I'd come to dread. Clara, she said, what a funny coincidence. Are you here for a consultation? I'm waiting for one, I said. Of course you are, she said. And then she turned to the manager and said, in a voice meant to be heard, Madame Laurent, I'm so sorry, I should have warned you. This is my ex's current girlfriend. She's very sweet, but this might not be the right fit for her. Elise Beaumont pieces really do require a certain understanding of the aesthetic and the investment. Madame Laurent looked at me. Then she looked at Vivienne, and I watched her choose. Madame Laurent straightened her spine, and her expression shifted from professionally neutral to something colder, something final. She looked at me the way people look at things they've decided to discard, not with anger, but with complete and absolute dismissal, the way you'd look at a stain on expensive upholstery before calling someone else to deal with it. Miss Webb, she said, her voice now carrying none of the careful politeness from before. I've checked our appointment schedule, and I'm afraid we're completely booked through the end of the month. We simply won't be able to accommodate a walk-in consultation at this time, or frankly, at any foreseeable time. I looked at her steadily. I see. Our clientele typically comes to us through referral, she continued, warming to the dismissal now that Vivian was watching with barely concealed delight. It's not simply a matter of budget, though that is, of course, a consideration. It's about fit, cultural fit, lifestyle alignment. Our gowns are worn by women who move in specific circles, who attend specific events, who understand what it means to represent this brand on their wedding day. She paused for effect. I'm sure there are wonderful boutiques that would be a much more appropriate match for your needs. Perhaps something in Midtown or the Garment District. Very accessible, very reasonably priced. Every word was a precisely aimed stone. I could feel them landing, but I kept my face still, because I'd been trained since childhood to keep my face still when people tried to rattle me. I understand, I said again. Wonderful, Madame Laurent said, with a smile that meant the opposite. Now, if you'll excuse us, Miss Park is a valued client, and I need to attend to her properly. She turned her back on me. That was the moment. The actual moment when she turned her back on me while I was still standing in the room, while I hadn't moved toward the door, while I was still technically a potential customer in her establishment. She turned her back on me and began speaking to Vivian about a new shipment of Monique L'Huillier pieces that had arrived from Paris. And Vivian, glancing at me over Madame Laurent's shoulder with a look of absolute triumph, said, "Oh, before we get to that, I did want to try on that Lethbridge sample again, the one in the second fitting room. I left a note last time about the adjustment to the bodice." "Of course," Madame Laurent said. "I'll have it pulled immediately." "Wonderful, Clara," Vivian added, still looking at me, her voice sweet as antifreeze. "I hope you find something lovely, somewhere." I should have left then. I should have walked out the heavy glass door with my dignity intact and never looked back. Any reasonable person would have, but something made me stay. Not stubbornness exactly, something quieter. A need to see how far this would go. A need to know with absolute certainty what these women were willing to do when they believed they had power over someone. I moved to a rack of sample gowns near the far wall and began quietly browsing, my fingers moving along the fabric edges, ivory silk charmeuse sliding cool against my fingertips, heavy Duchess satin, layers of tulle soft as breath. The gowns were extraordinary, genuinely extraordinary. Each one was a work of construction and artistry, the kind of craftsmanship that justified enormous price tags. A junior consultant approached me, young, nervous, clearly aware of the dynamic in the room. "Would you like to try something on?" she whispered. "I can pull a fitting room for you." I looked at her. She was maybe 23, with kind eyes and the expression of someone who'd seen this kind of scene before and hated it every time. I almost said no. Almost. "Yes," I said quietly. "Thank you." She led me to the third fitting room, the smallest of the three, and pulled a sample gown from the rack at my direction. It was an A-line gown in heavy ivory silk, with a subtle embroidered bodice and a clean, elegant train. Not the most expensive piece in the shop, not the most elaborate, but beautiful. Genuinely, quietly beautiful. The kind of dress that didn't shout, but simply was. She helped me into it with careful hands, her fingers efficient and respectful. In the mirror, I looked at myself and felt something shift in my chest. Not because the gown was expensive or from a famous designer, but because for a moment I could see it. Our wedding, spring sunlight, Marcus at the end of an aisle, that warm look in his eyes that he only ever aimed at me. "It's lovely on you," the junior consultant said softly. "Genuinely." "Thank you," I said. And then the fitting room door opened. Madame Laurent stood in the doorway. She hadn't knocked. She simply opened the door, and behind her was Vivienne Park, still in her camel coat, champagne flute in hand, with the expression of someone who'd been waiting for exactly this moment. "What is this?" Madame Laurent said, her voice sharp. "Who authorized this fitting?" The junior consultant went pale. "I thought since she was already here, I could just—" "You thought?" Madame Laurent repeated, her tone cutting the sentence off at the knees. "This sample is reserved for Miss Park's fitting session. It needs to be steamed and prepared. Whatever made you think it was appropriate to put a walk-in into a reserved sample?" "I'm sorry," the young consultant said. "I didn't know it was reserved. It was on the open rack. It was on the open rack because my staff made an error this morning. An error I have now corrected. An error that apparently has been compounded by your complete disregard for our protocols." She turned to me. "I need you to take that gown off. Immediately." I looked at her. "I'll take it off carefully." "You'll take it off now," she said. "I will take it off carefully," I repeated, "because it's a couture sample, and it deserves to be treated with respect." Something crossed Madame Laurent's face then, something ugly, the look of a person who has been accustomed to instant deference and has encountered resistance for the first time in a space where they expected none. She reached past me, toward the back of the gown, toward the long silk-covered zipper that ran from the base of my neck to the small of my back. Her hand gripped the fabric at the seam. I felt the tension in the material change, felt the seam pull in a way it shouldn't. "Stop," I said. She didn't stop. She pulled, sharply and deliberately, in a motion that was too forceful to be accidental and too precise to be clumsy. There was a sound, a clean, terrible sound, the sound of fine stitching giving way under deliberate force. The back panel of the sample gown split along a 4-inch section of the side seam, the ivory silk gaping apart like a wound. The room went very quiet. The junior consultant made a small sound that was almost a word. Vivienne, from the doorway, raised her champagne flute slightly, like a toast. I stood very still. My heart was hammering, but my face was calm. I'd spent 18 months being Clara Webb, the pediatric nurse, a woman who absorbed small cruelties gracefully, and before that, a lifetime being trained to maintain composure in situations designed to destabilize. I had deep reserves of stillness. "You just damaged your own merchandise," I said to Madame Laurent. "The gown was damaged when you forced your way into this fitting room," she said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes showed the first flicker of something, not quite fear, but awareness that things might have gone further than planned. "And now, I need you to take it off and leave this establishment before I call building security." "You're going to call security," I said. "I already have," she said. "They're waiting at the front." I looked at her for a long moment. I looked at Vivian, who was watching me with the satisfaction of someone who has orchestrated exactly the outcome she wanted. I looked at the young consultant, who had the expression of someone witnessing something they'll feel guilty about for years. Then I looked at the torn gown in the mirror, at the gaping seam, the damaged silk, the irreparably broken line of something that had been beautiful 3 minutes ago, and something in me went very, very cold. Not sad, not humiliated, cold. The particular coldness of a person who has been pushed past the boundary of what they're willing to tolerate, who has crossed from attempting grace into something else entirely. I dressed with complete calm in the small changing area beside the fitting room mirror, took my time, folded my sweater neatly before pulling it over my head, laced my sneakers with deliberate care. I took the damaged gown off with the same care I'd have given any garment, passed it to the pale junior consultant, and walked out of the fitting room. 2 security guards stood at the front of the store, both large, both professional, both clearly embarrassed to be there. Madame Laurent appeared behind me, directing them toward me with a gesture. The guards moved to flank me, not touching me, but making the escort toward the door unmistakable. Vivian had followed us out of the back room and now stood near the reception desk, watching with quiet satisfaction, champagne flute still in hand. "Miss Webb," Madame Laurent said, loud enough for the 2 other consultants and the single other customer in the store to hear, "You are not welcome in this establishment. Please don't return." The guards opened the heavy glass door. Cold November air rushed in. The street outside was gray and sharp, the sidewalk still damp from morning rain, pedestrians moving past with their coats pulled close. I stepped outside. The door closed behind me with a soft, definitive click. I stood on Fifth Avenue in my jeans and my sneakers and my cream sweater, my hair messed from the fitting room, no coat, because I'd left it on the chair inside the fitting room when the guards appeared and no one had offered to retrieve it, the cold finding me immediately, slipping under my collar and along my arm. People walked past. Some glanced at me, registered nothing of interest, walked on. A cab honked at the corner. Somewhere up the block, a street vendor was selling roasted nuts, the warm, sugary smell of them cutting through the cold. I stood there for exactly 30 seconds. Then I took out my phone and called Marcus. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm and immediate. "Hey, how's the dress shopping going?" "Marcus," I said. My voice was very calm. "I need you." A pause, short but absolute. In that pause I could hear him recalibrate, hear the shift from casual to alert. "Where are you?" "Elise Beaumont Bridal, Fifth Avenue. I'm outside on the sidewalk. They removed me from the store." Another pause, shorter this time. "Are you hurt?" "No. But Marcus, I need to tell you something. I need to tell you who I actually am. And I need to tell you right now, before you do whatever you're about to do, because you deserve to know the truth." "Clara," he said, and his voice was completely steady. "I know who you are." I stopped breathing for a moment. "What?" "I've known for 4 months. Dr. Clara Marguerite Webb Ashton. I should have told you I knew. I'm sorry I didn't. But we're going to have that conversation later, you and I, because right now I need you to step away from the entrance of that store and toward the curb. Can you do that?" I moved toward the curb, my mind turning over what he'd just said, what it meant, what it changed. "Marcus, who are you?" And Marcus Chen, IT consultant, the man who ate soup at a 34th Street diner and tried on love like it was something simple, said, "I'll show you. Give me 8 minutes." He hung up. I stood at the curb. The cold was significant now, working its way through my sweater with determination. I crossed my arms, watched the traffic, and I waited. People flowed around me on the sidewalk. Inside the boutique, through the glass, I could see Vivian moving toward the window, tracking me with those sharp, satisfied eyes, clearly expecting to watch me hail a cab and disappear in defeat. 3 minutes passed. Nothing. 5 minutes. A woman beside me hailed a taxi and left. A delivery truck idled at the corner. Ordinary Manhattan chaos. Then, at exactly 7 minutes and 40 seconds, I heard them before I saw them. The sound was low at first, a deep mechanical rumble that didn't fit the rhythm of regular traffic. It grew steadily, building from the direction of 57th Street, growing louder and more layered as more vehicles joined the sound. People on the sidewalk began to slow, began to turn. Something was happening at the intersection, something large. The first SUV came around the corner. It was a Mercedes G-Wagon, matte black, enormous, moving with the unhurried certainty of a vehicle that knows the road will make room for it. Its windows were tinted to absolute opacity. Its plates were diplomatic. On the front corner of the hood, a small flag flew, deep navy blue with a gold crest, the crest of the Principality of Chiron. Behind it came the second, then the third, then four more, side by side, where the street was wide enough, filling Fifth Avenue from curb to line. Then three more behind those, then the 10th, the largest, a custom-bodied armored vehicle that moved like a ship, slow and absolutely certain. 10 vehicles, all identical matte black, all with diplomatic plates, all with the Chiron crest. They took up the entire block, and they stopped in a precise formation that blocked Fifth Avenue in both directions completely, the kind of traffic stop that only happens when someone has the authority to command it. On the sidewalk, people stopped walking entirely. Phones came out. Someone said something in what sounded like Italian. A child pressed against the window of the shop behind me, face wide with amazement. Inside Elise Beaumont Bridal, through the glass, I watched Vivian Park's champagne flute tip in her hand. A small amount of champagne sloshed over the rim. She didn't notice. She was staring at the street. The door of the fourth SUV opened. 4 men in dark tactical suits emerged first, scanning the street with the practiced efficiency of people trained to assess threats in seconds. They positioned themselves at the corners of an invisible perimeter, hands loose, faces neutral, eyes moving. Then the door of the 6th vehicle opened, and Marcus stepped out. He was still in the clothes he'd been wearing when we parted this morning, gray wool trousers and a dark navy coat, but he carried himself differently than he ever had in our 18 months together. The posture was the same, the face was the same, the warm eyes were the same. But something in the way he moved had changed, or more accurately, had been revealed. The slight deference he'd always worn like camouflage, the self-effacing tilt of his shoulders, the habit of taking up slightly less space than he was entitled to, all of it was gone. He walked through the gap his security team had created with the absolute ease of a man who has never in his life had to consider whether he was allowed to be somewhere. He came directly to me, ignoring the watching crowd, ignoring the phones recording from every angle, ignoring everything except my face. He stopped in front of me and took both my hands in his. His hands were warm, mine were freezing. "I'm sorry it took 8 minutes," he said. "Traffic on 57th. I laughed. One surprised, involuntary laugh. "Marcus, my full name," he said quietly and clearly, "is Marcus Aurelius Chen Waverly, Crown Prince of the Sovereign Principality of Chiron. My family has governed Chiron for 230 years. Our sovereign wealth fund is currently valued at $231 billion. I work as an IT consultant because I needed to know if someone could love me without knowing any of that." He looked at me with those warm, steady eyes. "And you do, and I love you, and I'm sorry about your coat." He signaled to one of his detail, who immediately moved toward the boutique entrance. Marcus himself turned toward the door, and I fell into step beside him because there was nowhere else I wanted to be. The heavy glass door of Elise Beaumont Bridal opened, and Marcus walked in. His security team, 4 of them, entered with him, positioning themselves at the corners of the showroom with quiet efficiency. The other consultants backed against the walls. The single other customer stood frozen near a rack of veils, her phone halfway to her face. Madame Laurent appeared from the back room, clearly drawn by the commotion on the street. She saw the security detail first, then her eyes moved to Marcus, then they moved to me, standing beside him. Something in her face began the process of understanding before her mind had quite caught up. "Who are you?" she said, directing the question at Marcus, because he was clearly the person in charge. "My name is Marcus Chen Waverly." Marcus said pleasantly. This building was listed for sale 3 weeks ago. The asking price was $41 million. I'm going to buy it in the next 5 minutes. He pulled out his phone, made one call, spoke 2 sentences in Chiron dialect, and hung up. Done. My legal team will contact the current owner's attorneys today to formalize the transfer. He looked at Madame Laurent, which means this is now my building. The silence in the boutique was total. Even the street noise seemed to have dimmed. Your lease, Marcus continued, still in that pleasant tone, will be reviewed by the new property management team. I expect they'll find it doesn't meet the standards required for renewal. He tilted his head slightly. You're dismissed from this premises. Effective immediately. Madame Laurent's face moved through several expressions in rapid succession. Shock, disbelief, the beginning of outrage, and then something that was rapidly becoming fear. You can't simply walk in here and... I just did, Marcus said, and I'd like it done quietly, please. Security. One of the details stepped forward, positioned himself at Madame Laurent's elbow, not touching her, just present, and gestured toward the door with an open hand. You have 3 minutes to collect your personal belongings, Marcus said. Anything belonging to the business stays. You're no longer affiliated with this business. Madame Laurent looked at me, truly looked at me for the first time since I'd walked in this morning. Her face was pale, her lipstick very red against it. I watched her search my expression for something, mercy maybe, or guilt, or the satisfaction of revenge. I gave her nothing. I felt nothing for her except the mild disinterest one feels for a problem that has already been solved. She walked to the reception desk, picked up a small personal bag, and left without another word, the security team member maintaining his quiet escort all the way to the door. Marcus turned to Vivian. Vivian Park had not moved from her position near the reception desk. She stood perfectly still, her camel coat immaculate, her champagne flute now empty and dangling from her fingers at a slight downward angle, as though she'd forgotten it was there. Her face was an extraordinary thing to look at. The triumph from 20 minutes ago had evaporated completely, replaced by something more complex. Calculation mixed with fear. The expression of someone very smart, rapidly reprocessing an enormous amount of information. Vivian, Marcus said. He didn't say anything else for a moment, just her name, and that was enough. Marcus, she said. Her voice was almost steady. Almost. I didn't know she was... Yes, you did, Marcus said. You've been researching Clara for months. You've been feeding information to your contacts, attending the same events, engineering encounters. You're an intelligent woman, Vivian. You make it your business to know exactly what you're dealing with. You knew who she was, or you suspected strongly enough that it amounts to the same thing. He paused. And you chose to humiliate her anyway. Vivian's jaw tightened. I was protecting yourself, Marcus said. You were protecting yourself from the possibility that I was genuinely happy, which I am, from the certainty that I had made a permanent choice, which I have. He looked at her with the expression of someone closing a door. My family's holdings include commercial real estate across 17 cities, including every borough of New York. We hold equity stakes in 14 retail chains, 7 hotel groups, and 4 restaurant groups. My legal team is going to send you a letter tomorrow morning that formally notifies you that you are no longer welcome in any establishment in which we hold a controlling interest. He let that settle for a moment. That's quite a lot of establishments, Vivian. Her face went very still. You can't do that. It's already being drafted, Marcus said. Think of it as a professional boundary. You chose to make your hatred of my fiancé your occupation. I'm simply making the consequences of that choice concrete. He turned away from her then, fully and finally, and looked at me. Clara, he said. Or rather, would you prefer I say it properly? I smiled. The first real smile I'd managed in the last hour. Clara is fine. Clara is who I am. He reached into his coat and produced a small brushed steel case, roughly the size of a jewelry box, with a biometric lock on the front panel. He pressed his thumb to the scanner, and the case opened with a soft, pneumatic exhale. Inside, on a bed of deep navy velvet, sat a ring. It was not the ring he'd proposed with, though I still wore that ring on my right hand, Because that ring was the one he'd chosen for me when he thought we were two ordinary people, and I would wear it for the rest of my life for that reason. This was different. This was a ring that had existed for 140 years, designed in 1883 for the first crown princess of Chiron, a stone of extraordinary rarity, a 14-karat pad paradsha sapphire, the precise sunset orange-pink color that the finest specimens of this stone achieve, flanked by two shield-cut diamonds of 4 carats each, set in a platinum band, engraved with the royal crest of Chiron. The entire piece had been appraised most recently at $25 million and was considered one of the finest examples of royal jewelry in Southeast Asian history. It caught the boutique spotlights and threw color across every white surface in the room. Pink gold light danced on the walls, on the ceiling, on the faces of every person still standing in that space. Marcus lifted it from the case and looked at me. "This has been in my family for 140 years, he said. "It's meant to be worn by the woman who stands beside the crown prince of Chiron. I'd like that to be you. Not because of who your family is, not because of what you have, but because of who you are." He paused. "Both of you, all of you. Clara the nurse, Clara the Webb Ashton heiress. All of it. I want all of it." I held out my left hand. He slid the ring onto my finger beside my original engagement ring, because the original was staying. I'd made that clear with a single look, and he'd understood immediately and hadn't argued. The pad paradsha sapphire sat on my hand and blazed with quiet, certain fire. I looked up at him. "We have so many things to talk about." "We do," he agreed. "You knew for 4 months." "I did. And you didn't say anything." "Neither did you," he pointed out. I laughed again, and this time it was a real laugh, full and genuine, and he smiled his quiet smile, the one that had been there in the diner on 34th Street when he was nothing but a man asking a waitress about soup. Behind us, I heard Vivian's heels on the marble floor, moving toward the door, not running, because she was too proud for that, but moving. Her exit was quiet, which was probably the most undignified part of it, for a woman who'd always entered rooms as performances. Leaving quietly felt, I imagined, like erasure. She did not look back. Outside on 5th Avenue, the 10 black SUVs waited in their precise formation, blocking the block in both directions, the Chiron crest flags catching the November wind. People were still gathered on both sidewalks, watching. Phones were still recording. By tomorrow morning, those videos would be everywhere. The story of Crown Prince Marcus Chen Waverly of Chiron buying a 5th Avenue bridal boutique in real time to defend his fiancé would be on every news platform in 17 countries. My mother called me 17 times in the next 2 hours. I answered on the 18th. "I saw the videos," she said without preamble. "The whole world saw the videos. Are you all right?" "I'm completely all right," I said. "And him? The prince? He's extraordinary," I said. "You'll love him. He loves used bookstores and bad soup, and he knew who I was for 4 months, and loved me anyway." She was quiet for a moment. "Then, that's the one then." "That's the one," I agreed. We were married in the spring, as planned. The ceremony was held at a venue neither of us had specifically chosen, because once our actual identities became public, approximately 40 governments offered to host the wedding, and we had to make a diplomatic decision. In the end, we chose a small ceremony in New York, in the city where we'd found each other over chili jokes and soup and 18 months of uncomplicated love. I wore both rings, the rose gold solitaire on my right hand, the pad paradsha sapphire on my left. They were not a matching set. They were not meant to be. One represented a moment of pure love, uncomplicated by history or inheritance. The other represented the fullness of who we both were, two people who'd hidden themselves from the world to find each other, who'd managed, against considerable odds, to succeed. The boutique on 5th Avenue was converted, under its new ownership, into an arts education center for underserved youth. The name Elise Beaumont disappeared from the awning within a week of the purchase. The junior consultant, the one with kind eyes, who'd quietly offered me the fitting room, was given a reference letter by Marcus's personal secretary and a job offer from a couture house whose owner was a personal friend of the Chiron royal family. Vivian Park received the promised letter from Marcus's legal team exactly 24 hours after the incident. Her attorney replied within the week, with a letter that was simultaneously threatening and desperate. Marcus's legal team replied with 400 pages of documentation regarding our holdings and concluded with a single clarifying sentence: we were not negotiating. Madame Laurent attempted to open a new boutique in a different location 3 months later. The building's owner, upon reviewing the new tenant's professional history, declined to finalize the lease. The owner, as it turned out, was a subsidiary of a holding company that had been quietly acquired by a Chiron-affiliated investment group the previous autumn. These things happen. True power, I learned, is not loud. It does not announce itself at the door or demand recognition from people who haven't earned the right to give it. True power walks into a room in jeans and sneakers and knows exactly what it is, regardless of whether the room knows it too. True power does not need Madame Laurent's approval or Vivienne Park's acknowledgement or anyone else's permission to exist. I spent 18 months being Clara Webb because I needed to know who I was when everything was stripped away. And what I found was this: I was still myself, still curious, still stubborn, still moved by the smell of hospital corridors and old books and good soup, still capable of genuine love, still worth choosing. I just also happened to be worth approximately $11 billion and counting. What did you think of this story of extraordinary karma? Did Madame Laurent and Vivienne Park get exactly what they deserved when those 10 royal SUVs blocked the entire street? Did you feel the satisfaction when Marcus bought the building in 5 minutes and dismissed them both with absolute calm? If you loved watching arrogant, cruel women discover they'd humiliated the wrong person, then smash that like button right now. Share this story with everyone you know who has ever been dismissed by someone who thought they had the power to decide your worth, and subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of justice, royalty, and karma working exactly the way it should. Hit the notification bell and tell me in the comments, what would you have said to Vivienne Park on the way out the door? Because revenge is sweetest when it's cold, complete, and utterly unstoppable.